Hey, cool kids. Welcome back into the Cool Grandpa podcast. I'm happy that you've chosen this moment to join me. I'm always happy to talk with you guys. And what's great is right now we're in summertime, full blown summertime. So we're past the 4th of July here in the States. And what we're doing right now is everybody's got vacations going on, everybody's getting together. If you're like me, I'm already making Christmas plans where we're going to go for and what kids we're spending Christmas with and all that kind of stuff. So lots of things going on right now. And what I want to do is just remind you that you can go to the Cool Grandpa store. There's hats, polos, all that kind of stuff there. So check that out. And what I want to do is, really get in and ask you a question today. Did grandparenting turn out exactly the way you thought it would? Maybe when you were younger, you imagined retirement it would include fishing trips with your grandkids, cheering at soccer games, teaching, kids how to cook up steaks, teaching them how to swim at the pool, whatever that might be. So we want to talk about that, but we also want to talk about for many grandparents, the reality is much more complicated. In fact, research and conversations happening in the grandparent communities across the United States and other countries point to three major pain points that grandparents are experiencing right now. One is family estrangement and loss of contact with grandchildren. The second one is raising grandchildren unexpectedly. The third is navigating difficult relationships and boundaries with adult children. And these aren't isolated issues, they're affecting millions of grandparents. And today I want to talk about these challenges honestly, share some of the research behind them, and most importantly, discuss how we can move forward with hope. So, I want to begin with perhaps the deepest pain point any grandparent can experience, and that is not being able to see your grandchildren. Not because the relationship has been broken, but because maybe that relationship with the adult children has become so strained or has become non existent that it's difficult for the grandparents to really get time to see the grandkids. Maybe the parents have blocked off communication. Maybe the parents have decided that they don't want to deal or interact with their adult parents, meaning the grandparents. And researchers estimate that approximately 6% of American adults are estranged at least from one grandchild or more. And family scholars describe grandparents in these situations as really collateral damage in conflicts between parents and adult children, like I was saying. The study published in the Journal of Family Issues found that estranged grandparents often experience grief, depression, anxiety, and feelings of shame, a total loss of identity, because maybe you were a grandparent for a year or two and then suddenly that relationship is severed and you don't have that connection. So now you're kind of back into being just empty nesters, right? Your identity as a grandparent has been somewhat taken away from you. And psychologist Dr. Joshua Coleman, one of the leading experts on family estrangement, explains that grandparents often experience this kind of ambiguous loss, grief without real closure. There's no funeral, there's no community support, no clear ending, just empty chairs at birthdays and holidays, maybe a stack of unsent birthday cards and Christmas cards. And, here's the thing. Most grandparents really don't talk about it. They're embarrassed, they blame themselves, or they don't want to burden anybody. Or they are aware enough that they've got so much anger towards their son or daughter, or their son in law or daughter in law, or the boyfriend, girlfriend, whatever the situation is, that they can't really talk about it without that anger really coming forward. And organizations such as More Than Grand and Grandkids Matter have identified grandparent estrangement as one of the fastest growing emotional challenges facing grandparents today. And maybe that's your story. Maybe you haven't seen your grandchildren in months, maybe years. Maybe you're carrying that anger that I was talking about, maybe guilt that maybe you did something that you recognize and you feel bad about it and it's causing a lot of guilt. Maybe there's confusion because you don't know what happened. I want to say something directly to you. You're not alone. There are millions of grandparents carrying the same heartache. Now, I wish I had a magic formula for reconciliation. I don't. Relationships are complicated, and especially these days where I think we see a lot of Instagram cheer squad going on when people announce that they're not having anything to do with their parents anymore. And instead of working it out, instead of having those painful conversations, that Instagram cheer squad jumps in and congratulates you on severing family relationships, sometimes over small things and sometimes over big things. But we all know that relationships are complicated and family systems are complicated. But I do believe there are some things that we can do. And number one on our side is keep the door open. We may not control that relationship, but you can control whether that door remains unlocked, meaning that you've put things in order that if they want to make the decision to reach out to you, that they can do that. It will be tough on their side to do that, just like it would be tough for us to go to our moms and dads and admit that we did something wrong and try to reestablish that relationship. But if they feel that that door is shut, it's going to make it so much harder to get through. Number two, take ownership where needed. None of us are perfect. If an apology is appropriate, make one. Take ownership of any of the mistakes that you've made and do what you can to make amends for those mistakes. Number three, become the healthiest version of yourself you can. If reconciliation happens tomorrow, who do you want your grandchildren to meet? A bitter grandparent or a healed one? A defeated grandparent or one who has continued to grow despite the pain? Because your story isn't over and neither is theirs. The second pain point is very different, but in many ways, it's equally life changing. And that is millions of grandparents who thought they were entering into retirement, thought that they were going to just be enjoying being a grandparent, whether that's at a distance or across the street or across the town, whatever that is. Sometimes you get a phone call, and that phone call or the county and state child protective services, contact you and say, hey, can you take the kids? According to the most recent data from the US Census Bureau, more than 2.4 million American children are being raised by grandparents or other kinship givers. That's aunts and uncles, that sort of thing. But when I talked with Generations United, and I had a podcast a few years ago with them, it's well over 2 million kids are being raised by grandparents. And many of these grandparents had to step in because of addiction, incarceration, death, military deployment, mental illness, and economic hardship. And according to the Generations United, it's really the top three, right? It's detention, desertion, or dependency is what really most of the time ends up causing grandparents to start to have to step in and raise grandchildren. And, the grandparents stepped in because they love their grandchildren, but love doesn't make it any easier. You can love all you want, but there's going to be challenges. A comprehensive review published in the International Journal of Environmental Research and Public Health examined dozens of studies involving custodial grandparents. The findings were really sobering to me. The majority of these studies showed that grandparents raising grandchildren experience increased stress, poor physical health, financial strain, depression, social isolation, delayed retirement. And, that all makes sense. If we go back and we talk about the stress, right? We knew how to raise our kids in the time that we were raising them. Raising grandchildren 20 years, 30 years removed from you having to deal with whether it's toddlers or children or young adults, teenagers, we don't necessarily know how their world revolves, and we don't know how to really guide them the same way. And we've got to take classes. We've got to get schooled up. We've got to build connections. The financial strain, of course, you were ready to spend money on yourself. Maybe you were ready to downsize your home and move into something that you could have paid cash for and lived out your retirement years in that situation with a smaller home. but now you need the space because you've got one or more grandchildren living with you. The social isolation is huge. If we think about this, think about when you were a parent, you were hanging out with other parents because that was where your kids were, right? So you had that group of other parents with children the same age. Now you're a grandparent. There's not many grandparents your age with your lived experience that have kids the same age as your kids. So now let's say your friend group and the people that you would normally associate with, you can't associate with them anymore. You're now associating more and more with the young parents. And sometimes that can be really isolating in of itself. And many grandparents, you're feeling exhausted because you're attending those parent teacher conferences at age 65. You're helping with homework. You're trying to navigate technology. And most of the time, too, you're dealing with the trauma that the grandchildren may have experienced and brought with them into your home. And often you're doing it while you're managing your own health challenges. So as you start to get on different medications, as your energy levels start to change, you've got these little kids that are running around and they need constant attention. I recently read an interview with a grandmother who said, "I love my grandchildren more than anything, but I thought I had already raised my children." And I think that sentence really captures the emotional complexity perfectly. Love and exhaustion, joy and grief, purpose and sacrifice, all existing at the same time. And if you're raising grandchildren right now, I want you to hear this. You're doing something extraordinary, but extraordinary doesn't mean easy. And you don't have to do it alone. Find support, seek out kinship caregivers, ask for help, accept help. That's a big one. A lot of us have a lot of pride, and a lot of us grew up with the idea that if you need help, there's something wrong with you. I'm here to tell you, as grandparents raising grandkids, what I've seen is that it's important to accept help, whether it's financial help from city, state, national government, whatever it is. Financially, don't be too proud. Take that money and to use it to help raise that grandchildren. Accept help with when it comes to babysitting. Accept help from wherever that comes from, and be sure to take care of your physical health. Take care of your emotional health, because if you burn out, everyone suffers, right? You can't pour from your cup if your cup is empty. So remember something important here. Your grandchildren don't need you to be a perfect grandparent, especially if you're raising those grandchildren, but they need you to be a present one. And the fact that you stepped up when your family needed you says a great deal about your character. Now, I want to transition over and let's talk about a challenge that almost every grandparent faces, and that's the relationship with grandchildren. I don't know about you, but sometimes I look at the way young parents do things and I think we never did it that way. Does anybody else say that? I mean, hopefully that's just an internal voice, but I understand probably my mom and dad and my grandparents, they and people of their age groups and generations probably did that same thing when it came to me raising my boys. Is that there was probably a lot of those comments about we never did it that way. Today, the food's different, the rules are different, technology is different, discipline is different, expectations are different, and sometimes that creates tension. One of the things too, I was just at my old scout camp, and it was really interesting the things that the state of Virginia will let young people do at a scout camp. Is changed quite a bit, and it's like, wait a second, you're taking out some of the pain and some of the struggle that helps create young men and young women of character, because they have now taken away some of those hard things. And so that's a difference right there, although it's a little different from what we're talking about. But researchers and family therapists consistently identify boundaries with adult children as one of the most common areas of conflict in grandparenting. Organizations such as Help Guide and Grandkids Matter report that many grandparents feel unappreciated, uncertain about their role, frustrated by parenting decisions, hesitant to give advice. And I think some of that hesitancy comes in with knowing that Again, it goes back to those estrangement, right? If I step in and I say something, I might lose that relationship because it feels sometimes that those relationships with young parents can be extremely fragile and transactional. And so that causes us as parents of adult children to maybe be hesitant to give advice. And there's ways to give it properly and the ways not to give it properly. So I want to acknowledge all that. But at the same time, many parents are reporting feeling judged or undermined by grandparents. And you can see the challenge there, right? We both have good intentions, but different expectations. One of the biggest transitions in life is moving from parent to grandparent. As I sometimes will say, is parent is very tactical, day-to-day activities, and grandparent is very strategic, and that we look at long term. We look at how the relationships are going to build. As parents, we made those rules. As grandparents, we influence rather than control. And that's not always easy to step into those different roles from that tactical to the strategic. And especially when we think that our children are making mistakes. But here's something that I've learned: most relationships are damaged not by one big event, they're damaged by 1,000 little moments. The unsolicited advice, the criticism, the eye roll, the passive aggressive comment, the statement, well, that's not how we did it. Can I offer a different perspective? What if our role isn't to win every parenting argument? What if our role is to become trusted advisors, people our adult children actually want to call, people whose wisdom is welcome, people who create safety rather than judgment? That doesn't mean that we never speak up. I mean, of course we do, but the timing matters, how you do it matters, and keeping in the forefront of our minds that the relationship matters more than being right. And here's the question that's worth asking: are you trying to be right, or are you trying to preserve the relationship? Because sometimes the answer is both. But if push comes to shove, preserving the relationship often creates opportunities for influence later. Our grandchildren need grandparents and parents on the same team. And sometimes being a great grandparent means letting go of the need to control. Remember, stepping back, looking with that bigger perspective of a strategic thinker about what's better for the family long term versus what do we have to do right now to either be right or to make sure that our voice is heard over everybody else's. I think being able to step back and look at the bigger perspective of how do we maintain the family, how do we maintain those relationships, is absolutely the best thing that we can do. Yeah. Unless there's danger of body and life and limb, most of the time being right isn't worth the risk and worth the damage to the relationships. So today we've talked about three of the biggest pain points grandparents experience. First is the family estrangement. Second is raising grandchildren unexpectedly. Third, navigating relationships with adult children. If one of these challenges describes your life right now, I want to encourage you. You are not alone. Millions of grandparents are walking these same roads. And while these struggles are real, they don't define you. You still have wisdom to offer. You still have love to give. You still have a legacy to build. So let me leave you with these three questions. Where am I hurting? Where do I need support? What kind of grandparent do I want my grandchildren to remember? Because being a cool grandpa or a cool grandma isn't about having a perfect family. It's about showing up with love, grace, and wisdom, even when family life gets messy. And maybe that's what grandparenting has always been about: loving well, leading gently, and never giving up on the family. Until next time, my friends, keep learning, keep leading, and keep loving. And remember to stay cool.